For years ago, I buried my husband. I stood beside his grave, watched the casket disappear into the ground, and spent years teaching our son how to live without his father. I believed the nightmare was over. Then, during a vacation flight with my 12-year-old son, he suddenly grabbed my arm so tightly it hurt. His face turned completely white. Barely able to breathe, he whispered, "Mom, that's Dad. He's sitting 2 rows behind us." I slowly turned around, and the man staring back at me had the same face, the same eyes, and the same wedding ring I buried 4 years earlier. People say time heals everything. They're wrong. Time doesn't erase grief. It simply teaches you how to carry it without collapsing every morning. My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 30 years old, and 4 years ago, I buried my husband, Ethan. He died during a weekend boating trip on Lake Michigan. According to the police, an unexpected storm overturned the small fishing boat. Rescue crews searched through the night before recovering a body the following morning. I identified him through the official process. There was a funeral, a gravestone, condolence cards, a folded American flag from the volunteer rescue team. Everything that tells you someone is truly gone. Our son, Noah, was only 8 then. He kept asking when Dad would wake up. I never found the right answer. The years that followed weren't easy. I worked extra shifts at the local accounting firm, learned how to fix leaking faucets by watching online videos, attended therapy every Thursday evening, and slowly rebuilt a life for Noah and me.
He was 12 now.
Smart.
Kind.
Still carrying his father's smile. When summer break finally arrived, I decided we both deserved something we hadn't felt in years. A fresh beginning. So, I booked a week-long vacation in California. As our plane climbed above the clouds, Noah leaned against the window, smiling for the first time in weeks. For a while, everything felt normal. About halfway through the flight, I noticed him becoming strangely quiet. His smile disappeared. His breathing became uneven. Then his fingers suddenly wrapped around my arm with surprising strength. "Mom." His voice barely escaped his lips. I looked at him. His face had turned completely white. His eyes weren't looking at me. They were fixed somewhere behind us. Slowly, he whispered words that made every drop of blood leave my body. "Mom." He swallowed hard. "That's Dad." For several endless seconds, I couldn't breathe. Then, with my heart pounding against my ribs, I slowly turned toward the back of the airplane. And the man sitting 2 rows behind us looked exactly like my husband. I couldn't move. Every instinct told me to turn back around and convince myself Noah had made a mistake. Instead, I forced myself to look again. The man was still there. He wore a navy baseball cap pulled low over his forehead and a pair of dark sunglasses, but nothing could hide the familiar shape of his jaw or the small scar beneath his left ear. I had kissed that scar 1,000 times. It was Ethan's. He seemed to sense someone watching because, for one brief second, our eyes met. His expression changed instantly. Not surprise. Not happiness.
Fear.
He quickly looked away and pretended to read the magazine in his lap. "Mom," Noah whispered again. "Why won't Dad look at us?" I don't know." The remaining hour of the flight felt endless. I couldn't stop watching him. He never once looked in our direction again. The moment the plane reached the gate, he stood before anyone else, grabbed a small black carry-on, and disappeared into the aisle. "Come on," I told Noah. We hurried after him. By the time we reached the terminal, he was already weaving through the crowd with surprising speed. "Sir," I called. He never turned around. I tried again. "Ethan." This time, his shoulders stiffened for the briefest moment. Then, he walked even faster. We followed him through the airport until he reached the taxi pickup area. Just before he climbed into a waiting cab, I managed to raise my phone and snap a photograph. The taxi pulled away seconds later. Back at the hotel that evening, Noah sat beside me as I opened our old family photo albums. I placed the airport picture next to Ethan's favorite vacation photo. Same eyes. Same smile. Same scar. Even the wedding band on his left hand looked identical. Noah looked up at me. "So, Dad's alive." I stared at the 2 photographs. "I don't know," I whispered. But if that isn't your father, then someone owes us an explanation I've been waiting for years to hear. The vacation ended 2 days later, but my mind never left that airplane. The moment Noah and I returned home, I pulled the old storage box from the back of my closet. Inside were the pieces of a life I'd tried so hard to put behind me. The police report, the coroner's paperwork, insurance documents, newspaper clippings, even Ethan's faded obituary. For 4 years, I had accepted every page without question. Now I read each one as though I'd never seen them before. Small details suddenly felt wrong. The body had been identified almost entirely through personal belongings and visual confirmation after the accident. DNA testing had never been completed because officials believed it wasn't necessary. One witness statement mentioned seeing another small boat near Ethan's fishing boat shortly before the storm. That statement ended abruptly. There was no follow-up. No explanation. My stomach tightened. The next morning, I called Detective Harold Bennett, the retired investigator who had handled the case years earlier. To my surprise, he remembered me immediately. "I've thought about that accident more times than I'd like to admit," he said quietly after listening to my story. An hour later, we met at his office. I handed him the photograph I'd taken at the airport. He stared at it for several long seconds. "I understand why this shook you," he finally admitted. "It looks exactly like your husband." Together, we reopened the old case files. The detective noticed something neither of us had questioned before. Several original documents had been replaced by updated copies months after the investigation officially closed. Someone had accessed the file, legally, but there was no explanation for why. Before either of us could speculate further, my phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. A calm male voice spoke before I could say hello. "Rachel, I know you've been looking for me." Every hair on my arm stood up. "I never wanted you to find me this way," he continued. "If you want the truth, meet me tomorrow morning." Then, after a long pause, he quietly added, "I promise, everything is about to make sense." I barely slept that night. The next morning, I drove to the small lakeside cafe the caller had chosen, arriving 20 minutes early. At exactly 9 o'clock, the man from the airplane walked through the front door. Without the baseball cap and sunglasses, he looked even more like Ethan. For one impossible second, my heart forgot everything I knew. He stopped a few feet away. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know what this looks like." I couldn't answer. I just stared. "My name isn't Ethan." The words hit me harder than I expected. "My name is Daniel." He slowly placed a folder on the table. Inside were birth records, adoption papers, and a recent DNA report. "I found these 3 months ago," he explained. "I was adopted as an infant. While searching for my biological family, I discovered I had an identical twin brother." My hands began to tremble.
Ethan.
Daniel nodded. Neither of us knew the other existed. He explained that a volunteer from the adoption agency had quietly helped him trace the family after the DNA results identified shared relatives. By the time he located Ethan's name, the boating accident had already happened. "I attended the funeral from the back of the cemetery," he admitted, lowering his eyes. "I didn't know how to approach you. You were grieving, and I thought my face would only make everything worse." Tears filled my eyes. "So, Ethan really is gone." Daniel swallowed hard before answering. "I'm so sorry, Rachel." He pushed the DNA report toward me. "I took another test through an independent laboratory after seeing you on the airplane. The results confirmed everything." I slowly read the final page. Identical twin relationship confirmed. Every mystery suddenly fit together. The resemblance,
The scar.
the voice, even Noah recognizing him instantly. Daniel looked at me with genuine sadness. "I never wanted to reopen your wounds," he said softly. "I only wanted you and Noah to know that Ethan had family who never stopped searching, even though we found each other far too late." A week later, Daniel met Noah for the first time. I had spent days explaining everything as gently as I could. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked only one question. "So, he isn't Dad?" I knelt beside him and held his hands.
No, sweetheart.
"Your dad is still the man who loved you more than anything." Daniel is your uncle. Neither of them knew the other existed. Noah nodded slowly. I think I'd still like to meet him. When Daniel walked into my living room, Noah froze for a moment. They stood looking at each other in complete silence. Then Daniel smiled. The same warm, familiar smile Ethan always gave whenever he came home from work. Noah's eyes filled with tears. You smile exactly like my dad. Daniel's own eyes became watery. I've spent my whole life wondering if I had family somewhere, he said softly. I never imagined I'd find my nephew. Without another word, Noah stepped forward and hugged him. Daniel hugged him back carefully, almost afraid the moment might disappear. A few days later, the three of us drove to Ethan's cemetery. The autumn wind gently moved through the trees as we stood beside the headstone. Daniel knelt quietly. I'm sorry we never found each other, brother, he whispered. I wish we'd had the chance. He placed a single white rose beside the grave. Noah reached into his backpack and pulled out an old baseball. Dad taught me how to throw with this, he said, placing it carefully beside the flowers. I wanted him to keep it. None of us spoke for several minutes. For the first time in 4 years, I realized the weight I'd been carrying wasn't just grief. It had been uncertainty. Now the questions were finally gone. The truth hadn't brought Ethan back, but it had given us something we thought we'd never have again.
Peace.
As we walked back toward the car, Noah slipped his hand into Daniel's. You don't replace my dad, he said. Daniel smiled gently. I never could. But Noah looked up at him. I'm really glad I found my uncle. I smiled through quiet tears. Sometimes life doesn't give us the miracle we desperately hope for. Sometimes it gives us something different. The truth. And while truth can't erase loss, it can heal the wounds that unanswered questions leave behind. That day, we didn't say goodbye to Ethan again. We simply learned that love can continue growing, even after goodbye.